Thank you. Good to be here today. Without further ado, let's take you into the research findings. So this was a joint effort from Colosseum Strategy, SMG, and their Plan Apps tool, and Kantar. Before we get into it, though, I'm going to rewind and take you back to the very first moment that I encountered retail media. This was 2012. I was working with my boss on an e-commerce presentation at the time. We were looking at different websites, and we noticed that on Amazon.com, there was a Tide ad. And my boss, who had actually previously been the CEO of IRI, now Circana, commented from his experience in CPG, FMCG world, he commented, "Oh, that's really interesting. It reminds me of an end cap. It's like a digital end cap." And so I immediately wrote that down. I said, digital end cap, that's great terminology. I'm going to use that. It took me about 12 years before I would use it again, but I did use it. And the second thing he thought was, this is really interesting. Amazon must be making an absolute fortune from these ads, right? He understood intuitively that an ad so close to the point of sale, the ability to influence the consumer at that point would be especially valuable. And we looked into it because we had data on this. And at the time, the average display ad online was $2.91. The average digital end cap was just $2.74. So it was undervalued back then, and it's undervalued today. Now, we've come a long way in retail media since then. It's a $60 billion industry in the US, about $160 billion worldwide. And of course, it's got on-site, which is a big part of it in the US, off-site, and in-store, which, as Sarah Marzana has noted, is the sleeping giant of retail media. So why is that the case? First thing is it has tremendous scale. Here's an analysis that was done looking at 14 major retailers in the US, comparing their digital audiences. So those are the digital audiences that got us to 60 billion, and their in-store audiences. And on average, they're 2 times as large. So just tremendous scale. I mean, you can see with Walmart, over 200 million people every month, right? And we think about shoppers in retail, but they're also audiences. This is part of why I think that the physical store is the next major media channel. Now, many of you have probably seen the Mary Meeker State of the Internet reports over the years, and she always did this comparison of time spent versus share of ad spend. And the point for many years, this was 10 years ago, was to show that mobile was like 20% of time spent and only 5% of ad spend, and that mobile was going to grow quite a bit. Well, fast forward to today, and mobile is 30% of time spent and 50% of ad spend. So it is the most invested channel, probably overinvested. But these are the emerging channels. CTV, obvious, that's getting a lot of time spent, and ad spend is coming up in parallel with that. But in-store, if you actually translate the physical store to a media channel and express it in terms of time spent, it's about 5.2% of all media time spent. But it's just 0.1% of ad spend. 0.1%. That's in-store retail media. So there's a big gap, right? And that gap's going to get filled. If you just fill the gap, it's a $20 billion opportunity in the US. I think it really is a channel that should probably be overinvested in time. So maybe it's a $40 billion opportunity. Consumers are receptive to in-store retail media. Right? We're actually always worried about the customer experience, as well we should be, but it actually turns out they're receptive to seeing commercial messages in the physical store environment, much more so than every other major national media channel. This is looking at the percent of people who are positive or neutral to the ad experience versus the percent likelihood that they'll pay attention to the ad, right? So attentiveness and ad experience is a positive for in-store. So perhaps not surprisingly, we can confirm through this research, which looked at over 12,000 different campaigns, that in-store advertising works, and it works quite well. On average, the average SKU uplift for the advertised brand was about 28%, and then for the overall brand, which obviously represents a larger overall footprint of sales, was a 12% increase. So how does in-store advertising work? We always think about it as far as performance. But as I look at it, it's really about upper funnel. Reach, quality, and then performance. In that order. The order matters. So I wrote an article in Adweek last year arguing that physical retail is the new TV. Now, I love TV. I don't think it's going to supplant TV, but it's harder and harder to get audiences through TV like you used to. And in-store actually can do a lot of the same things. Maybe not 30-second storytelling, but it has reach, has brand safety, provides cultural relevance. All these things matter, and it's what TV has historically had. And it's got audiences. The biggest retailers have audiences that are on par with the biggest broadcast networks. These audiences are a function of visit frequency. So particularly when you're talking about grocery or FMCG retailers, they have the weekly visits here in Europe. I know it's often a lot more than that. And if you look at the overall audience compared against the visits per visitor, you'll see that the FMCG retailers over here have much higher visit frequency, and that ends up translating to much larger overall audiences. It also means that you can reach those audiences more quickly. That reach is a function of visibility in the store. Not all stores are created equal. So we've got large format stores like your traditional grocery retailer. You've got smaller format stores like convenience. This is actually research from Co-op Media and Lumen Research that looked at the large store and said any individual screen in the store has an opportunity to see about 7 impressions, whereas the smaller store has about 15, so twice that, because there's better visibility. In that small format store, you've got better sight lines, right? You don't have as many obstructed views, and you can probably make it around to more parts of the store. So that visibility is a critical element of reach. This, maybe not surprisingly, translates to higher effectiveness on a percentage basis. So for the convenience format, it actually outperforms the main estate format on both average SKU and average brand uplift. Now, the other side of that is, of course, the large format stores have larger basket sizes, so the overall number of dollars that are influenced on average is much, much higher. So I talked about, it's not just about reach, but fast reach. TV doesn't work as quickly as it used to do. And so here's an example of a campaign out of the Netherlands for an FMCG brand. And at the end of the campaign, it was 70% total reach. So you can really get significant reach. Retail media in the context of this campaign was 32%. So on its own, pretty strong reach. The TV and total video part of the campaign was 57%. Retail media added an incremental 13 percentage points of reach. But if you look at the shape of the curve too, you can see that often TV has this slower build, a more gradual build, so maybe doesn't get those high audience reach numbers and penetration early in the campaign, but grocery can. And so actually the ability to get to that 50% threshold early in the campaign increasingly depends on having something like retail media that can deliver that fast reach. This wasn't just a one-off. A lot of campaigns in this Kantar research showed pretty similar overall findings, that the total video parts of the campaign were about 65% reach, retail media 29%, and an average incremental reach of 7 percentage points. So again, not insignificant. This is a big part of really getting the reach that's required today. One of the things about TV is we've historically had effective frequency. Effective frequency, the rule of thumb, is about 3 to 5 impressions. Now, it's not quite the same thing in in-store, but one of the interesting things that we found was that between 3 and 5 touch points in the store was actually kind of the optimal range of effectiveness. You can see that that's the range that for both average SKU lift and average brand lift really maximize. And then after that, you start to see some diminishing returns. So I think that's a nice rule of thumb, that you actually probably want more than a single touch point. You want to have a few, but you may not want to overdo it. Let's talk about quality now. So here we're looking at a Kantar campaign that was measured branding effectiveness across all the different touch points, again, cross-media campaigns and retail media. And I want to highlight the yellow portions. That's the in-store retail media piece. So where did it perform very well? Perhaps not surprisingly, trial. You're in the store, it's probably going to induce trial better than most media. Purchase intent, bottom of the funnel, that also makes sense. But product differentiation, very mid-funnel, right? Consideration, when you're at that moment of decision, you want to have something that really highlights why they should choose your brand, or that your brand has a specific product benefit, and that's better done in store probably than anywhere else. So that's one of the areas that the branding effectiveness really shines for in-store. Now, dynamic digital content. That's the big evolution we're having right now, right? We've always had static in-store media, and it's been very effective in its own right, but the story gets more interesting when you have dynamic creative. It's more eye-catching, you can do more with it, gives you a better creative palette. And so we looked at two different types of formats where we had parallel digital format and static format. So one was digital 6 sheets, and the other was digital gondola ends. And you can see in both cases that the digital creative performed better in driving sales effectiveness. It also did that for the brand, and actually the impact on the overall brand from that digital creative was much stronger. Now I'm going to highlight this one. Over here we call it gondola ends, in the US, end caps. So I talked about the original digital end cap. Well, this is the in-store digital end cap, realizing kind of the full vision of why this format is so valuable. So if we put a spotlight on it, we can see and maybe actually imagine what it's like and why it's so effective, right? In this case, it's like a Coke Zero ad that catches your eye. But it's also going to have a big impact on buying Coca-Cola products, whatever they are, at the shelf. And you can compare that. Nothing wrong with the one on the right. It's still a good in-store activation, but you really can capture the consumer in a totally different way with dynamic digital creative. In-store retail media is full funnel. It drives branding effectiveness everywhere. Over a lot of these Kantar studies, the findings are showing consistently it works top of funnel awareness, consideration, so top of funnel about 11% better than average, 6% on consideration, and then a lot better on purchase intent. But again, that probably makes sense because it is at the bottom of the funnel and closer to purchase. Another thing we analyzed were specific formats. And the specific formats, in this case, we're looking at the percentage brand lift that we were looking at before and dividing that by the percentage SKU sales lift, right? And here what we're trying to understand is where is the brand halo the biggest? And we looked at about 37 or 38 different parts of the store. And what we found was that the top ones actually were significantly large format installations, the store takeover. And this is becoming more prominent. I know it's kind of pioneered over here in the UK. Best Buy in the US just announced that they're doing a store takeover format. Very, very effective from a branding standpoint. But then you see things like goalposts, branded bays, digital 6 sheets. All of these also do very, very well in terms of the brand halo. This campaign is looking at both the branding and performance, sales performance effects for a cross-media campaign. And if we look at the right first, the sales lift, that point of sale display in store carries a lot of weight, right? It's about 29% of that sales effectiveness. Off to the left, it's the branding effectiveness, 15%. Not as much of the sales effectiveness in relative terms, but pretty significant nonetheless, and actually bigger than the effect of digital out of home and online as part of this campaign. So it's a big piece of the branding equation. Performance. Okay, now we'll talk to the more obvious parts of how in-store advertising works. So here we're looking at the top formats in terms of overall sales lift. And one of them really jumps out at you. In-store sampling. I've said that product samples to me are the best form of media, right? We don't think of it that way, but it's actually a form of media. You just get to taste, consume the product, and not surprisingly, if you try it, you're going to buy it. Experiential formats are also right up there at the top of the list. So the more experiential, the more likely you're going to impact that buying behavior. But then you also have a lot of more immersive formats like freezer unit wrap, aisle domination, things of that nature, and those also are among the top performers. So this study is looking at product samples in store. And one of the key things in terms of how product sampling works in experiential retail media is that it drives effectiveness not just in short term, but over time. So if you're just looking at a standard attribution window, in this case of 28 days, we have ROAS and iROAS here. I'll say we can just throw the ROAS out the door. iROAS is the metric that matters here. And you see a 28-day iROAS of about $5. But if you continue to follow that person and their buying behavior over time, after 26 weeks, it's about $15, so about 3 times bigger. We have other studies that we've looked at that are all the way to 52 weeks, and those studies end up showing 4 or 5x difference. right? So people, it only takes a few people to try something, convert, decide they like it, and start buying into the future, becoming a recurring buyer, for it to have a really significant impact on that overall number. Another thing we found from the research is that the store zone really matters. The sales lift is really a function of how close that activation is to where you pull that product from the shelf or can actually purchase it. So out of store, you're furthest away, front of store, furthest away. That's where you see the lowest relative sales impact. Whereas when you get to the fixtures, at the shelf, and checkout, that's where you have the strongest overall impact on average. Now, where things get interesting is how do you activate the different store zones together? There's potential for really interesting synergistic effects, creative executions across all the different formats. And here we looked at different store zones working in tandem to see what the overall impact was. There's a lot more research to do on this. It's actually a really rich area for research, but just as a high-level finding, what we found was that when you have adjacent store zones, like front of store and secondary spaces, right, you can kind of move people and guide them through the path to purchase in store. That's where the biggest effectiveness is. Secondary spaces into the fixture, right? The ones that don't perform as well on average are when you have a big gap between where people might be seeing the activation. So if you're all the way at the front of the store versus the fixture, there's not enough to kind of draw them from one place to the next, and so it's going to have a little bit more muted impact. Lots more experimentation to be done here, but I think it's a really exciting area for research going forward. So ultimately, what are 3 things that CMOs should know coming out of this? The first one is that retail media is not just a sales driver. It is a brand builder. It is full funnel, and we need to start thinking about it that way. We need to reframe our thinking. CMOs need to start thinking about this way and start thinking about allocating national dollars to this and not just shopper and trade. Second is that physical stores can deliver the incremental reach that TV can't do as well today as it used to. Those 18 to 49-year-olds you can't reach on TV, they do shop in stores. So that's how you can build that incremental reach, and with grocery, you can even do it quickly. And lastly, context and creative are what really make this channel work. We're not talking enough about the fact that the context is the best you can have. You're in the store, you're close to the product, you can experience the product, and it's a really new creative palette that, to me, we're just at the beginning stages of thinking about everything that we can do with that. So CMOs, I think, really need to start taking advantage of this opportunity. Creative agencies should be all over this, and I think it's really the next frontier and why I'm so excited about this next major media channel. So without further ado, I am going to welcome to the stage my co-researchers, Bianca Hall from SMG and Simon Atherley from Kantar. All right, well, welcome. And first of all, Simon, I love the fact that your title is Head of Marketing Effectiveness, and I was lamenting the fact that that does not exist in the US. So we don't talk about marketing effectiveness, but to me, that's what retail media is really about, and in-store maybe more so than any other part of the channel. So Bianca, I'd like to start with you. Talk me through the research. I mean, I mentioned that there were 12,000 Plan Apps campaigns. How long has that taken to gather, and what can you do with it?
Yeah, I actually ran into one of our old partners just before this, Sam from PepsiCo, and we were reminiscing around how 10 years ago, PepsiCo was one of our first brands who worked with us on Plan Apps. And effectively, Plan Apps was created because Sam kept asking us questions that we were not able to answer. See that continue to grow. We now have this really large data set which enables us to answer questions and actually talk about performance benchmarks for both brands and retailers at a really granular level and give them a strong view of what good looks like. And we can use it to understand evaluations better and how well a campaign has performed, but we're also using it to inform smart planning. And I think the bigger the data set gets, the more granularly you can cut it. And you've demonstrated that so amazingly in this report, that we can look at category, we can look at different combinations. And because we also store the creative for every single one of these activities, we can really start going more granularly into answering questions around what messaging works most effectively, whether branding or templated is the right approach, and use this to inform our strategy. And then finally, what I'd say is it's been amazing to watch things evolve over time. I think, like, probably about 10 years ago, digital screens started coming into front of store because previously most of them were all sort of static on a roller. And shock and horror to us when we first saw some of the results. They were actually a lot poorer than we expected them to be. And when we looked at the creatives, we saw that a lot of people were just taking the creative from above the line, or maybe even just taking the static creative and making it wiggle around a little bit. And then we're quite surprised that digital was not doing everything it promised to do. And I think we're at another sort of turning point within retail media now where digitalization is really taking off. And there's absolutely opportunity to do it brilliantly, but there's also opportunities to make some mistakes and learn from them as we go along.
Yeah, I mean, I was like a little kid in a candy store with all this data, but it really reduced it primarily to quantitative insights. And you're mentioning there's also the qualitative strategic insights that are all about creative. And we're still so early in tapping the potential of this channel. So we're already seeing great results now. Just think about where it gets when we start to take full advantage of the opportunity. Now, Simon, historically, it's been really hard to measure across traditional and retail media channels. I spent a big part of my career trying to solve the challenge of cross-platform measurement, and you all are doing it in the context of retail media today. So you're doing this because you have a new methodology, THX. What can you tell us about that methodology and how you applied it here?
Yeah, so I guess let's start by very briefly, I think as you articulated really well, cross-media measurement of retail media in-store, contextualized across all those different channels has been a gap. And the implication of that, as we were talking a little bit to Rory in the green room earlier around the undervaluing of retail media really because it has lasting brand effects, right? It's like the iceberg where, we can see some very, very important and impressive effects at the top. But underneath, there's all this sort of lasting brand equity effect of that. And you talked earlier very eloquently around it's such a receptivity moment. Consumers are so open to that in that moment of decision. So we really need to find a way of plugging that gap. So, the measurement challenge has been, how do you get a single source view? How do you understand the synergistic effects of all those things working together? So, in the past couple of years, we've developed a technology called THX, which is an app that consumers can download. And what that does with their permission is it allows us to passively detect exposure to retail media and all other touch points. So we use geolocation, we use audio content recognition, so a bit like Shazam for measurement of retail media and also other channels. And with their permission, that gives us a really brilliant view of that cross-channel perspective, which really plugs that gap. And I think when we started to get some results through, we've measured hundreds of campaigns that include retail media and other touch points. It starts to solve some of that challenge of how do you benchmark versus the impact of VOD, of TV, of out of home. And I think the fruits of that were shown in some of the data you showed, like that stat. 37% of the brand effect from cross-media campaigns coming from retail media. That's huge, and we're starting to really uncover the full impact of that.
In the US, we often hear that one of the biggest impediments from the buy side is the lack of measurement. And so I think one of the things that I hope is a big takeaway here and everyone should be excited about is there is a lot of measurement. It's evolving quickly with in-store, bringing traditional audience measurement into in-store, a lot of unique innovations that had to occur to make that happen. But we're really starting to realize this future. So I think there's a lot of reason for excitement. I'm just thinking about what's next for us with research. There's so much more to do. I'm really excited to understand cross-platform deduplication across all these different channels, these synergistic effects I mentioned. I think that's going to be a rich area for discovery. What's getting both of you excited in terms of what you want to dig into next?
I think we're all equally excited about this, but the importance of looking at creative effectiveness. You talked about it earlier. It's an area where I think there's a gap in terms of what does best practice look like. And we know, of course, that the quality of content, the ability of that to trigger the brand, to capture attention in those environments is fundamentally crucial. So I think there's more and more we can learn on that. And to your point earlier, Andrew, with new formats, in-store, video, digital, the scope for optimization there, I think it's a new frontier of effectiveness. And I think, you made the point as well, Bianca, we can't just take content and just put it into a different environment. Every major channel that we've brought on board and from Kantar we've measured and started to help unlock the brand effect of that. There's always a need to tailor and contextualize for channel. I think there's lots more we can learn there and lots of exciting testing we can do to enhance effectiveness.
Yeah, the testing, that was a big insight that I had along the way that it was like this big light bulb moment for me when you're like, we can test with digital creative, and I'm thinking about all the different contextual factors, time of day of week, all the things that really matter on in-store, and we're going to be able to test those in a really unique way that wasn't possible with static in-store media. Bianca, you said you were going to land the plane.
We were talking earlier about how a lot of data that you use in the report is short-term data from plans, which is really, really important. And then Simon has added the context of that really longer-term brand building approach. And the thing that I'm really excited and curious about is how do we continue to bridge that gap between the short-term and the long-term? And I think retail media is incredibly well placed to do that. Because of first-party data, you mentioned audiences before. How can we not just show what uplift a campaign does in the live period? How can we see where that uplift is coming from? Is it coming from shoppers that are new to the brand, new to the category, new to the retailers? That's where it really starts getting juicy. And the fact that we can track that not in the live period, but also, not just in the live period, but also in a sustained post period, I think is where we start getting to really interesting territory.
Yeah, maybe a future where we can actually understand campaign delivery, short-term effectiveness, and long-term sales effectiveness. We just need to learn to walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah, and I think the content of the report as well is going to give us a really good ammunition to have those conversations on the need to be more joined up and aligned, and make sure that in-store retail media syncs as part of those broader campaigns and how that works together, because we know those synergistic effects are so important. So I think we were a great start point in the evidence in the report.
Excellent. Well, I think we're going to leave it there. Simon, Bianca, thank you so much.